I never thought my biggest scandal would start with a simple assignment submission. But when Professor Jones looked at me with that strange smile, I knew something had gone terribly wrong. This morning, while packing my backpack, only one thing occupied my mind: the deadline. The literary analysis assignment that I'd finally completed at 3 in the morning. I was so exhausted that I just stapled the papers together and shoved them into my bag without a second thought. What I didn't realize was that my study desk had 2 stacks of papers sitting on it. One was my assignment. The other was a ridiculous letter I'd written for my best friend Liam as a joke. It wasn't exactly a love letter, just something silly we did to make each other laugh, writing dramatic confessions like we were characters in some cheesy romance drama. This particular one said, "I think I'm falling for someone I shouldn't. Every time he speaks, my heart does this stupid flutter thing. His voice, his presence, it's driving me insane." We'd crack up reading these overdramatic notes to each other, never imagining anyone else would see them. But this letter looked absolutely real, like an actual confession, and I gave it to Professor Jones, along with my assignment. After class ended, I was heading toward the exit when his voice stopped me cold. "Ronnie, could you stay back for a minute?" My heart dropped instantly. I turned around slowly. Professor Blake Jones stood there, tall with a sharp jawline, always impeccably dressed in tailored black shirts and gray slacks, his dark hair styled in that effortlessly messy way that somehow looked perfect. His gray eyes were fixed on me with an unusual curiosity that made my stomach twist. "Yes, Professor," I managed to say, trying desperately to sound normal. He extended a paper toward me, my assignment, but attached to it was the letter. My heart sank completely. "This is yours, correct?" he asked, tapping the paper lightly. I swallowed hard. Yes." He nodded slowly. Then that smile appeared, soft, mysterious, completely unreadable. "Interesting read, Ronnie. Very honest. I appreciate the bravery." Words failed me completely. My palms were sweating, and I could feel heat rising to my face. "If you ever need to talk about anything," he continued, his voice taking on a strange warmth that I'd never heard before, "my office door is always open." "Understood?" I could only nod before practically fleeing from the classroom. Once I reached the campus lawn outside, my phone buzzed with a text from Liam. "Bro, did you get the letter?" My heart stopped beating for what felt like a full minute. "What letter?" I typed back with shaking hands. "The one I left on your desk this morning. Lol. The fake love confession thing, remember?" With trembling fingers, I opened my backpack. Inside was an extra copy of my assignment, and another letter, the real one Liam had written. That's when the horrifying realization hit me like a freight train. I'd given Professor Jones my actual assignment along with Liam's fake love letter. A letter that now looked completely genuine. And he thought I was confessing feelings to him. Oh no. Oh God, no. The rest of the day passed in a blur of panic and regret. I couldn't focus on anything. My other classes might as well have been taught in a foreign language because nothing registered. All I could think about was that letter, Professor Jones's mysterious smile, and the way he'd said, "I appreciate the bravery," like he was acknowledging something deeply personal. By evening, I'd convinced myself that my academic career was over. He probably thought I was some inappropriate student with a crush. Would he report me? Would I get expelled? My mind spiraled through increasingly terrible scenarios. Liam found me at the library, looking confused. "Dude, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I gave Professor Jones your fake love letter," I whispered, glancing around to make sure nobody could hear us. "He thinks it's from me. He thinks I have feelings for him." Liam's eyes went wide. "Wait, what? How did that even happen?" I explained the mix-up, watching as Liam's expression shifted from confusion to barely suppressed laughter. "Dude, this is actually hilarious. Just tell him it was a mistake tomorrow." "How am I supposed to do that?" I hissed. "He already talked to me about it. He said his door is always open if I need to talk." "Liam, he thinks I'm in love with him." Okay, calm down," Liam said, though he was still grinning. "Just email him tonight. Explain the situation. Simple misunderstanding. Problem solved." But I couldn't bring myself to send that email. Every time I started typing, I imagined how mortifying the explanation would sound. "Hey Professor, that deeply emotional love letter wasn't actually for you, it was a joke between friends. That somehow seemed worse than letting him think it was real. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying the moment in my mind, the way Professor Jones had looked at me, that knowing smile, the warmth in his voice. There was something in his expression I couldn't quite identify. Not disgust or discomfort like I'd expected. Something else entirely. The next morning, I seriously considered skipping his class. Maybe I could drop the course entirely, transfer to a different university, change my identity and start a new life somewhere far away where nobody knew about my humiliating mistake. But I couldn't do that. I needed this class to graduate, which meant I'd have to face Professor Jones eventually. As I walked toward campus, my phone buzzed again. Another text from Liam. Stop overthinking this. Just talk to him. What's the worst that could happen? I could think of about 100 terrible things that could happen. Actually, but Liam was right about one thing: avoiding the situation wouldn't make it disappear. I'd have to confront this mess eventually. Little did I know that the confrontation would come much sooner than I expected, and in a way I never could have anticipated. Because when I arrived at campus and headed toward the library, I wasn't prepared for what would happen next. I wasn't prepared for the way fate would force me directly into Professor Jones's path, making avoidance impossible. And I definitely wasn't prepared for what he would say to me when we finally spoke alone. As I approached the library entrance, lost in my anxious thoughts about how to handle this disaster, I wasn't watching where I was going. That single moment of distraction would change everything. Because sometimes the universe has a sense of humor about these things, and sometimes it decides that the person you're desperately trying to avoid is exactly the person you're about to crash into. My college career, my reputation, my sanity, everything was about to get a lot more complicated. The next morning, I stopped twice before entering campus. My plan was straightforward: avoid Professor Jones completely, skip his classes if necessary, drop the course if that's what it took. Maybe even consider transferring schools if the situation became unbearable. But fate apparently had other plans for me. As I walked toward the library, completely absorbed in my thoughts about how to navigate this disaster, I collided hard with someone. Books scattered everywhere across the floor. I immediately dropped down to gather them, apologizing repeatedly, when my eyes landed on a pair of shoes. Black Oxfords, perfectly polished, unmistakably familiar. Ronnie. My blood turned to ice. I lifted my head slowly, already knowing who I'd see. Professor Jones stood above me, hands casually in his pockets, an amused smile playing at his lips. Sorry, Professor, I stammered, quickly collecting the fallen books. I wasn't paying attention to where I was going. Clearly, he replied. Then he extended his hand toward me. Your notebook. I looked up and saw my personal journal in his hand. My stomach dropped. Thank you, I said quickly, reaching for it, but he pulled it back slightly, just out of reach. Are you avoiding me, Ronnie? His question was direct, leaving no room for deflection. My breath caught in my throat. No, I've just been busy with other assignments. He finally handed the notebook back, but as he did, his fingers brushed against mine deliberately. The contact lasted only a second but felt electric. Remember what I told you? My office door remains open. There was something in his eyes, something that made me simultaneously nervous and strangely curious. An intensity I hadn't noticed before. Yes, Professor, I whispered. That smile appeared again, soft but somehow dangerous. Good boy. Then he walked away, leaving me standing there with my heart racing uncontrollably and my face burning hot. Class was even worse than I'd imagined. While Professor Jones lectured about Victorian literature, his gaze kept finding mine across the room. It wasn't subtle either. These were deliberate, lingering looks that made my classmates start noticing. I could feel their curious stares, wondering why our professor seemed so focused on me. Then he called on me directly during a discussion about character motivation. Ronnie, what would you say drives the protagonist's obsession in this novel? Every head turned toward me. My throat went completely dry. I think it might be forbidden attraction, I answered, the words tumbling out awkwardly. Something he knows he shouldn't want. Professor Jones tilted his head thoughtfully. Forbidden. That's an intriguing word choice. Can you elaborate on that? I swallowed hard, suddenly very aware that this felt less like a class discussion and more like a personal conversation. Maybe he wanted something society wouldn't accept. so the impossibility of it consumed him, made it grow into an obsession. For several long seconds, the entire classroom fell silent. Professor Jones stared at me with an intensity that felt almost physical. I couldn't look away, trapped in his gaze like I was the only person in the room. Finally, he smiled. "Excellent analysis, Ronnie. Very insightful. Almost as if you're speaking from personal experience." My face felt like it was on fire. Several classmates exchanged knowing glances, and I wanted nothing more than to disappear through the floor. After class ended, I grabbed my things and rushed toward the exit, desperate to escape. But my phone buzzed before I made it outside. A text message appeared on the screen. "Come to my office, 4 o'clock this afternoon, Joan." My hands started shaking again. This was it. He was going to confront me directly about the letter. Maybe report me for inappropriate behavior. My academic career was definitely over. Liam caught up with me outside, immediately noticing my distress. "Hey man, you look terrible. What happened?" "He wants to see me in his office," I said quietly, showing him the text. "This afternoon." Liam's expression shifted from concern to worry. "What are you going to tell him?" "The truth, I guess. That it was all a mistake. A stupid joke that went wrong." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed those words anymore, because the way Professor Jones looked at me during class, the deliberate touches, that knowing smile, none of it suggested he was upset or uncomfortable. It suggested something else entirely. Something I didn't dare name. The hours until 4 o'clock crawled by agonizingly. I couldn't eat lunch. Couldn't focus on my afternoon classes. My mind kept racing through possible scenarios, each more mortifying than the last. Would he be angry? Disappointed? Would he insist I transfer to a different section? Or worse, would he sit me down for an uncomfortable conversation about appropriate student-teacher boundaries? By the time 3:45 rolled around, I was seriously considering just not showing up. But that would make everything worse. Running away wouldn't solve anything. At 3:58 I stood outside his office door, taking deep breaths to calm my nerves. From inside I could hear soft classical music playing, something melancholic and beautiful that somehow made everything feel more surreal. I raised my hand to knock but hesitated. My knuckles hovered inches from the door as doubt flooded through me. Maybe I should just turn around, pretend I never got the text, claim I was sick or had an emergency. "Come in, Ronnie." His voice came from inside before I'd even knocked. He knew I was standing there. My hand trembled as I turned the doorknob and pushed the door open. The office was dimly lit with curtains half drawn, creating an intimate atmosphere that immediately made me uncomfortable. Professor Jones sat behind his desk with a book open in front of him, reading glasses perched on his nose. Today he looked more relaxed than usual. White shirt with sleeves rolled up to his elbows, no tie, top button undone. "Have a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. I sat down, acutely aware of every sound, the soft music, my own rapid breathing, the quiet rustle of papers. My heartbeat thundered so loudly in my ears that I worried he could hear it. Professor Jones removed his reading glasses slowly and set them aside before fixing me with his full attention. "Do you know why I asked you here?" I swallowed hard. "The letter?" He leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming thoughtfully on the armrest. "I've taught at this university for many years, Ronnie. I've encountered hundreds of students. But your confession was uniquely honest." The word confession made my face burn with embarrassment. "Professor, I can explain." "Explain what?" he interrupted, leaning forward suddenly, his gray eyes locked onto mine. "That you're attracted to me? That your heart races when I speak?" My throat closed up completely. Words disappeared. All I could do was sit there, frozen, as Professor Jones studied me with an expression I couldn't decipher. "It wasn't like that," I finally managed to whisper. "The letter wasn't supposed to be what you think." "Then what was it supposed to be?" His voice dropped lower, almost gentle. There was no accusation in his tone, just genuine curiosity, mixed with something else I couldn't identify. I closed my eyes briefly, gathering courage. It was meant as a joke, something silly I wrote for my friend. I mixed up the papers by accident when I was exhausted from staying up all night. I never intended for you to see it. "A joke," he repeated slowly, processing this information. Then that enigmatic smile returned. But Ronnie, there was no name in that letter, just the phrase someone I shouldn't fall for. You never actually told me it was about me. My eyes snapped open in surprise. Then why did you assume? Why did I assume? He leaned back again, crossing his arms over his chest. Because everything about your behavior tells me, Ronnie. The way you can't maintain eye contact when I'm near. How you tense up whenever I call on you in class. The nervousness radiating from you right now. Body language rarely lies. I had no response to that. He was right, of course. I was completely transparent. He stood up from his chair, moving around the desk with deliberate slowness. I stiffened in my seat, unsure what he intended. He approached until he was standing beside my chair, close enough that I could smell his cologne mixed with coffee. A combination that was oddly intoxicating. Then he did something unexpected. He leaned against the armrest of my chair, bringing his face close to mine. So close I could count his eyelashes if I wanted to. If I'm completely wrong about this, he said quietly, his breath warm against my skin, then tell me now. We can end this conversation right here and pretend it never happened. But if I'm right, his gray eyes dropped to my lips for a fraction of a second before returning to meet my gaze directly. Then I need you to know something important. I notice you too. My heart literally stopped. Time seemed to freeze completely. What? I barely managed to breathe the word. He straightened up, putting some distance between us again, hands sliding into his pockets. I notice everything about you, Ronnie. How thoughtfully you answer questions in class. That small smile you give when you finally understand something complex. The way you tap your pen against your notebook when you're nervous or deep in thought. I couldn't form words. My brain had completely short-circuited. But he continued, his tone becoming firmer, more serious. This situation is extremely complicated. I'm your professor. I control your grades, your academic progress. There are ethical boundaries that exist for good reasons. Then why did you ask me to come here? The question came out shakier than I intended. If this is so wrong, he exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. The first time I'd seen him look anything less than perfectly composed. Because I needed to be honest. With you and with myself. I've spent years maintaining professional distance from students. It's never been difficult before. But with you, he trailed off, seeming to struggle with his next words. He walked back to his desk, deliberately creating physical space between us. Until this semester ends, he said, not looking at me directly. I am only your professor. Nothing more. After that, if you still want to discuss this, we can have a conversation as equals. My throat felt impossibly tight. Emotions swirled through me. Confusion, hope, fear, excitement, all tangled together. But until then, he finally turned to face me again. His expression carefully neutral. This stays between us. No one else can know. Do you understand? I nodded slowly, not trusting my voice. You should go, he said softly, before anyone notices how long you've been here. I stood on unsteady legs and moved toward the door. My hand was on the doorknob when his voice stopped me one last time. Ronnie? I turned back to look at him. For what it's worth, I wish circumstances were different. Those words echoed in my mind as I left his office and walked through the empty hallway. My heart was pounding, my thoughts racing. Because everything had just changed completely. He'd admitted he noticed me too. He'd said circumstances were complicated, not impossible. He'd set a timeline, the end of the semester. That meant there was a possibility, a chance that after enough time passed, we could explore whatever this connection was between us. But the next few hours brought a harsh dose of reality. As I sat in the campus coffee shop trying to process everything, attempting to focus on homework that my brain refused to comprehend, doubt began creeping in. What if he regretted saying those things? What if by tomorrow he'd convince himself to maintain complete professional distance? What if I'd imagined the intensity in his eyes, the weight behind his words? Liam joined me eventually, sliding into the seat across from me with his usual energy. So, how did it go? Did he yell at you? No, I said quietly. It was complicated. Complicated how? I couldn't tell him the truth. Not when Professor Jones had specifically said this needed to stay between us. He was understanding about the mix-up. Said we could move past it. Liam studied my face skeptically. You look weird. Something else happened. Nothing happened, I insisted, but even I could hear how unconvincing I sounded. Over the next few days, I became hyper-aware of Professor Jones's presence. Every class felt charged with unspoken tension. He maintained perfect professionalism, never giving any indication of our private conversation. But sometimes I'd catch him looking at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. Brief glances that lasted only seconds but felt significant. The semester stretched ahead of me like an endless obstacle course. Weeks and weeks of maintaining this secret, of pretending nothing had changed, of sitting in his classroom knowing what I knew now. It felt impossible. But what I didn't realize was that everything was about to get much more complicated. Because secrets have a way of coming to light, especially in small university environments where gossip spreads like wildfire, and someone had started paying very close attention to the way Professor Jones and I interacted. Someone who would soon make our private situation devastatingly public. The following week was absolute torture. Professor Jones kept his promise. In class, he remained completely professional, maintaining careful distance. But his eyes betrayed him. Those stolen glances when he thought nobody was watching. The slight pauses whenever he said my name during lectures. Everything was driving me slowly insane. And I was losing my mind too. Because now I knew the truth. He felt something too. The awareness of our mutual attraction made every interaction feel charged with electricity. When he'd hand back assignments, I'd feel the brief brush of his fingers against mine, and wonder if it was accidental or deliberate. When he'd call on me during discussions, I'd see the flicker of something in his expression before he masked it with professionalism. It was maddening, this dance of pretending nothing existed between us while being hyper-aware of every small moment. One rainy afternoon, I was sitting alone in the library's quiet corner, attempting to focus on an essay that my distracted brain refused to process. The steady rhythm of rain against the windows created a cocoon of white noise around me. I'd chosen this isolated spot specifically to avoid running into anyone, especially him. But then he appeared. Professor Jones walked into the library, wearing casual clothes, dark jeans and a gray sweater that made him look younger, more approachable. Completely different from his usual formal attire of pressed shirts and tailored pants. For a moment I thought maybe he hadn't seen me, that I could remain invisible in my corner. "Ronnie," he said quietly, approaching my table with purpose. I looked up, unable to hide my surprise. "Professor Jones, what are you doing here?" He gestured to the empty chair across from me. "Office hours ended. May I?" I nodded, unable to form words. He sat down and suddenly the spacious library felt incredibly small. Intimate. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the soft patter of rain. I pretended to read my textbook, but the words blurred together meaninglessly. Finally, he broke the silence. "This is difficult for you, isn't it? Pretending everything is normal?" My pen stopped moving across the page. I slowly lifted my eyes to meet his. "Yes." He leaned forward, elbows resting on the table, voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "It's difficult for me as well." My breath caught in my throat. "Every single day," he continued, his gray eyes intense and vulnerable. "When I see you in class, I notice things I shouldn't. The way you furrow your brow when you're confused about something. How you bite your lower lip when you're concentrating. I have to constantly remind myself of the boundaries that exist. But Ronnie, it's becoming increasingly hard to maintain them." My heart was beating so chaotically I was certain he could hear it. "Professor Blake," he interrupted softly. "When we're alone like this, please call me Blake." "Blake," I repeated hesitantly. His first name felt forbidden on my tongue, thrilling and dangerous all at once. He closed his eyes briefly, as if hearing his name from my lips affected him the same way. Then he stood abruptly, creating distance between us again. "I should go. It's not safe for me to be here alone with you like this." "Wait," I said without thinking, the word escaping before I could stop it. He paused, turning back to look at me. "When the semester ends," I asked, my voice shaking slightly, "do you really think we could try? That this could become something real?" He turned fully to face me. His expression was raw, unguarded in a way I'd never seen before. "I honestly don't know what will happen, Ronnie. But I want to find out. I want to try." Then he left, walking away while I sat there breathless and overwhelmed. But the next day, everything changed dramatically. I was sitting in Professor Jones's class, half listening to a discussion about narrative structure, when the classroom door opened unexpectedly. Dean Patterson entered, accompanied by a severe-looking woman carrying a leather portfolio. "Professor Jones," the dean said formally, her tone brooking no arguments, "we need to speak with you immediately. In private." Blake looked confused, his professional composure slipping for just a moment. "Of course, Dean Patterson." They left the classroom together, and immediately the room erupted in whispered speculation. Students leaned toward each other, theories flying about what could possibly require the dean's personal intervention during class time. Liam, sitting beside me, leaned close. "What's going on? This seems serious." "I have no idea," I whispered back, but dread was already forming a cold knot in my stomach. Several agonizing minutes passed. The substitute monitor who'd been sent to supervise us did nothing to quell the growing rumors. Then the door opened again. Dean Patterson's face was grave. Blake's jaw was clenched tight, his entire body radiating tension. The formal-looking woman stood slightly behind them, observing everything with clinical detachment. "Class," Dean Patterson announced, her voice cutting through the whispers like a knife. "Professor Jones will be taking a temporary leave of absence, effective immediately. There's an ongoing investigation that requires his full cooperation." My heart plummeted into my stomach. The word investigation echoed through my mind like a death knell. Investigation into what? A brave student asked from the back row. The dean hesitated, clearly weighing how much information to share. "A student has filed a formal complaint regarding inappropriate conduct. Until the matter is fully investigated, Professor Jones cannot continue teaching." Gasps filled the classroom. Students immediately began talking over each other, speculation running wild. Some looked shocked, others intrigued by the scandal, a few sympathetic. Blake's eyes found mine across the crowded room for just a second. In that brief moment, I saw something that made my chest tighten painfully. Hurt, deep wounded hurt. As if he thought I might be the one who'd filed the complaint. As if I'd betrayed him after everything we'd shared. Then he looked away, following the dean out of the classroom while students continued their shocked discussions around me. I sat frozen in my seat, unable to process what had just happened. This couldn't be real. Someone had filed a complaint against Blake about inappropriate conduct. My mind raced through possibilities, trying to understand what could have prompted this. Liam grabbed my arm. "Dude, you okay? You look like you're about to pass out." But I couldn't respond, because I'd just realized something horrifying. If someone had noticed the tension between Blake and me, if they'd seen those lingering glances or noticed the way we interacted, they might have misunderstood. They might have thought he was behaving inappropriately with a student. And if that investigation revealed anything about our private conversations, about the feelings we'd confessed to each other, Blake could lose everything. His career, his reputation, his entire future. I had to find out who filed the complaint. I had to fix this before it destroyed him. I didn't sleep at all that night. Dean Patterson's words kept replaying in my mind on an endless loop. Inappropriate conduct. And that look Blake had given me, filled with hurt and something that felt like betrayal, haunted every moment I closed my eyes. But I hadn't done anything. I hadn't filed any complaint or spoken to anyone about what existed between us. The next morning, I skipped my first 2 classes and went straight to the dean's office. I needed answers. I needed to clear my name and understand what was happening. "Dean Patterson," I said after knocking and entering without waiting for permission, "I need to speak with you about Professor Jones." The dean looked up from her paperwork, surprise flickering across her stern features. "Ronnie Hayes, correct? You're one of Professor Jones's students." "Yes, ma'am." I stood straighter, forcing confidence into my voice. "I need to know who filed the complaint against him. That information is confidential." "Was it me?" I interrupted, my frustration breaking through, because if someone claimed I filed a complaint, that's completely false. I never spoke to anyone about Professor Jones in any negative capacity. Dean Patterson studied me for a long moment, her sharp eyes assessing. "The complaint didn't come from you. It was filed by Amy Richardson, a senior in the literature department." Amy. The name hit me like a physical blow. I knew her. Everyone did. She was constantly hovering around Blake's office, always asking for extra help, staying after class to discuss assignments. She'd been trying to get his attention for months. What exactly did she claim? I asked carefully. The dean hesitated, clearly debating how much to reveal. She alleged that Professor Jones crossed professional boundaries with her. She provided screenshots of text messages she characterized as inappropriate in nature. My stomach twisted. She's lying. Professor Jones would never. Mr. Hayes, the dean cut me off firmly. Your loyalty is admirable, but you cannot possibly know. Yes. I can, I insisted, leaning forward. Professor Jones is one of the most professional ethical instructors at this university. He maintains clear boundaries with every student. If Amy showed you messages, they're being taken out of context. Dean Patterson sighed, removing her reading glasses. That's what the investigation will determine. Both parties will have the opportunity to present their evidence and testimony. Has anyone asked Professor Jones for his side of the story? I demanded. He's been given the opportunity to provide a formal statement, she said. So far, he hasn't offered much of a defense. That's what worried me. Blake was staying silent, probably paralyzed by guilt over our situation. He was letting himself be destroyed rather than risk exposing our connection and potentially damaging my reputation in the process. I left the dean's office with a new determination burning in my chest. If Blake wouldn't defend himself, then I would defend him. Liam had mentioned once, during a random conversation, that he'd helped move some furniture into Blake's apartment complex. After pressing him for details, I got the address and went straight there. The apartment building was modest, nothing fancy, exactly what I'd expect from a young professor still building his career. I stood outside his door for several minutes, gathering courage before finally knocking. The wait felt eternal. I was about to knock again when the door finally opened. Blake stood there looking completely unlike himself. His hair was disheveled, dark circles shadowed his eyes, and he wore old sweatpants and a wrinkled t-shirt. He looked exhausted and defeated. Ronnie? Shock registered on his face. What are you doing here? How did you even— It wasn't me, I said immediately, the words tumbling out. The complaint. I didn't file it. I would never do that to you. His expression softened immediately, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. I know that. Then why aren't you fighting this? I asked, frustration and desperation mixing in my voice. Why are you just accepting what Amy's saying without defending yourself? He stepped aside, wordlessly inviting me in. I entered cautiously. His apartment was surprisingly sparse. Books covering every available surface, minimal furniture, a half-empty coffee mug on the side table. It felt temporary, like he'd never fully settled in. Sit down, he said quietly, his voice hoarse. I sat on the edge of his couch while he collapsed into the chair across from me, burying his face in his hands. I'm not defending myself properly, he finally said, his voice strained and tired. Because I do feel guilty, not about Amy. I know those messages are being misrepresented. I helped her through some family issues, offered support as a mentor would, but she's twisted the context completely. Then explain that to the investigation committee. I urged, show them the truth. If I explain everything thoroughly, Blake continued, looking up at me with haunted eyes, they're going to ask questions. They're going to investigate all my student interactions. And Amy has already made it clear she's suspicious about us. She's noticed the way I look at you in class. My breath hitched painfully. I hadn't considered that possibility. If I bring you into this investigation, Blake said, his voice cracking slightly, your reputation gets damaged. Your academic future could be compromised. Other students might treat you differently. And I can't let that happen. I won't sacrifice your future to save my career. So what's your plan? I asked, feeling desperate and helpless. Just let them destroy you? Lose your job and your reputation without even fighting back? He closed his eyes. If that's what it takes to protect you, then yeah. No, I said firmly, standing up. I'm not letting you do that. I moved to stand in front of him. I'm going to give a statement to the investigation committee. I'll tell them that Professor Jones has never behaved inappropriately with any student, that he's always maintained professional boundaries. And if they ask how I can be so certain, I'll tell them the truth about everything. Ronnie. Absolutely not. I can't lose you, I whispered, my eyes burning with unshed tears, before I even have the chance to really have you. Before we can even try. Blake stood abruptly, stepping closer. His hand reached out hesitantly before gently cupping the side of my face. His touch was warm, grounded. "You're incredibly brave," he whispered, his thumb brushing softly against my cheek. "And you're being incredibly stupid," I countered, tears threatening to spill over. He let out a soft, broken laugh. Then he leaned forward, resting his forehead against mine. We stood there like that, breathing the same air, sharing the same space. "We'll figure this out," he whispered. "Together. I promise." The investigation lasted 2 excruciating weeks. I gave my statement exactly as I'd promised. Clearly, honestly, and without hesitation. I explained that Professor Jones had always maintained appropriate professional boundaries, that he'd never once made me or any other student uncomfortable, and that Amy's complaint seemed baseless, given everything I'd observed. When they asked how I could be so certain about his conduct, I told them a carefully edited version of the truth. I mentioned that he'd once clarified appropriate boundaries when a misunderstanding occurred, demonstrating his commitment to ethical behavior. I didn't reveal the depth of our connection or the feelings we'd confessed, but I made it crystal clear that Blake had never crossed any lines. Other students came forward as well. Several testified that Blake was one of the most professional professors they'd encountered. Some mentioned that Amy had seemed overly interested in gaining his personal attention, often lingering after class or finding excuses to visit his office. Meanwhile, the investigation committee thoroughly examined the messages Amy had submitted as evidence. When viewed in their full context, they told a completely different story than what she'd claimed. Blake had indeed helped her through a difficult family situation, but his responses were exactly what you'd expect from a concerned mentor. Supportive, appropriate, and carefully boundaried. There was nothing remotely romantic or inappropriate about any of it. Amy had deliberately selected specific phrases, removed context, and presented them in a way that suggested something that had never existed. When confronted with the full message history, her complaint fell apart completely. The committee dismissed her allegations entirely and issued her a formal warning about filing false accusations. Blake was fully reinstated with a clear record. But before he returned to campus officially, before he stood in front of a classroom again, he sent me a text message. "Meet me at the campus garden. 6 o'clock tonight." I arrived early, my heart pounding with anticipation and nervousness. The sun was beginning its descent, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. The garden was mostly empty at this hour, just a few students scattered across the lawn in the distance. Blake sat on a wooden bench beneath an old oak tree, his hands in his pockets, looking more peaceful than I'd seen him in weeks. The tension that had pulled his features tight was finally gone. "Hey," I said softly as I approached. He looked up and smiled, a real genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Hey yourself." I sat beside him on the bench, close enough that our shoulders almost touched. For a few moments we just sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the sky. "The semester ends in 2 weeks," he finally said, breaking the quiet. "I know," I replied, my heart rate accelerating. "And after that," he continued, turning to face me fully, "I won't be your professor anymore. Not officially." My breath caught in my throat. "So," he said, his voice soft but steady, "if you still feel the way that letter suggested, whether it was originally meant for me or not, I need to know." I met his gray eyes directly. They were sincere, vulnerable, hopeful. The letter was supposed to be a joke written for my friend. But what I actually feel, that's completely real. Something shifted in his expression, relief, hope, and something deeper I couldn't quite name. "Me too," he whispered. He slowly extended his hand toward me, palm up, offering rather than taking. I placed my hand in his, feeling his fingers intertwine with mine. The gesture felt significant, like we were crossing an invisible threshold together. "We should take this slowly," he said. "Do things properly. No hiding, no secrets, no complications once the semester officially ends." "Slow sounds perfect," I agreed, smiling. He leaned closer, his eyes dropping to my lips. "But right now, I really want to kiss you. I've wanted to since the moment you walked into my office looking terrified and confused." My heart raced. "Then do it." And he did. The kiss was soft, gentle, tentative, like we were both afraid of breaking something precious. His hand came up to cup my jaw as he deepened the kiss slightly, and I felt electricity shoot through my entire body. When we finally pulled apart, both breathing harder, he whispered, "Completely worth waiting for." "Absolutely," I agreed, smiling against his lips. The final 2 weeks of the semester passed in a strange mixture of anticipation and normalcy. Blake returned to teaching, and I returned to being his student, but everything felt different now. We both knew what waited on the other side of finals, and that knowledge colored every interaction with possibility. When the semester officially ended, when I submitted my final paper and walked out of his classroom for the last time as his student, I felt simultaneously relieved and excited. The waiting was finally over. Blake was no longer my professor. We were finally free to explore whatever this connection between us could become. Our first official date was wonderfully simple. We met at a small coffee shop off campus, surrounded by books and the rich aroma of espresso. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. Our childhoods, our dreams, our favorite books, the music we loved. It felt easy and natural, like we'd been doing this forever. From that day forward, everything felt right in a way I'd never experienced before. What had started as an embarrassing, terrifying mistake, giving my professor a fake love letter, had somehow transformed into the most beautiful reality of my life. The universe had taken my worst moment and turned it into something incredible. Walking through campus with Blake's hand in mine, no longer bound by the restrictions of a professor-student relationship, but instead standing as equals, I realized something important. Sometimes the mistakes we make, the accidents that seem disastrous in the moment, lead us exactly where we're meant to be. Some people spend their whole lives searching for a connection this deep, this real. I'd found mine in the most unexpected way possible, and as Blake squeezed my hand gently, pulling me closer as we walked through the spring sunshine, I knew with absolute certainty that every awkward moment, every anxious day, every minute of waiting had been worth it. This was just the beginning of our story, the real one, not the accidental fake confession that started it all. And I couldn't wait to see where it would take us.